The smell of burnt coffee has a way of sticking with you. Not just in the kitchen, not just in the morning, but in your memory, years later, when you're trying to figure out exactly when things started going wrong. I remember standing at the counter on a Tuesday in late October, pouring a cup I already knew was overcooked, and watching my wife's best friend laugh at something on her phone. She was sitting at my kitchen table in my house, eating the breakfast my wife had made, and somehow, the way she laughed made my stomach turn in a way I couldn't explain yet. Her name was Diane. She had been my wife's best friend since college, the kind of woman who had an opinion about everything and a solution for nothing. She was loud in the way that people mistake for confidence, and she had been divorced twice by the age of 38, which she described not as a pattern, but as finally learning what she deserved. My wife, Claire, adored her. I tolerated her. For 11 years of marriage, that arrangement had worked fine. Claire and I had built something real together. We met when I was 29, married at 31, bought the house in Phoenix at 34. I worked as a project manager for a commercial construction firm. Long hours, good money, the kind of job that earns respect but rarely gets mentioned at dinner parties. Claire taught second grade, which she loved, and which she was genuinely gifted at. We didn't have children of our own, a fact that had settled into our life quietly, without bitterness, the way some absences do. We had a good marriage. Not a perfect one, but a real one, with inside jokes and Saturday routines and a dog named Fletcher who slept at the foot of the bed. What we also had, though I didn't fully see it until later, were hairline cracks. Small ones. The kind you walk past every day in an old wall and tell yourself are cosmetic. Claire had started spending more time with Diane about 2 years before everything fell apart. More girls' nights. More weekends away. I didn't think much of it. Claire was social by nature, and I worked late more often than I should have. I told myself that her friendship with Diane was healthy, that I was being supportive, that a good husband doesn't keep tabs. I was half right about that. A good husband doesn't keep tabs. But a good husband also pays attention, and somewhere along the way, I had quietly, gradually, stopped paying attention to the right things. The first real sign that I should have caught was a dinner in September. Diane had just come back from a solo trip to Miami and was recounting it at our kitchen table the way she recounted everything. Loudly, with maximum drama, with a kind of hunger for reaction. She talked about the bars she'd gone to, the men she'd met, the absolute freedom of being answerable to no one. And then she looked directly at Claire and said, "You should try it sometime, just once, before you forget who you are." Claire laughed it off. I said nothing. Fletcher got up and walked out of the room, which in retrospect was the most sensible thing anyone did that night. I replayed that moment 100 times afterward. The way Claire had laughed, not dismissively, but almost wistfully. The way Diane had held eye contact a beat too long, I had noticed it in the moment and filed it away under Diane being Diane. I should have opened that file. I should have sat down with Claire that night and asked her, plainly and without accusation, whether she was happy. Whether there was something she needed that she wasn't getting. Whether the routine we'd built together was starting to feel like a cage. I didn't. I watched a football game and went to bed. Things shifted in November. Claire became slightly harder to reach. Not dramatically, not in a way that triggered alarm bells, but in the small ways that you notice only when you're honest with yourself about having noticed them. She started going to bed later, phone face down on the nightstand. She was more distracted during the conversations we did have. She smiled less at nothing, which sounds like a strange thing to grieve. But when you've lived with someone for 11 years, you know what their at-rest face looks like, and hers had changed. And then there was the business trip. Her school district occasionally sent teachers to professional development conferences, and in early December, Claire told me she was going to one in Austin 4 days, flights covered, hotel with another teacher from her school. I had no reason to doubt her. I kissed her goodbye on a Thursday morning, scratched Fletcher behind the ears, and went to work. She came back on Sunday evening quieter than she'd left. She hugged me at the door, held on a beat longer than usual, and then went to unpack. I made dinner. She ate it. We talked about nothing in particular, and sometime around 10 o'clock, sitting across from her on the couch while she stared at something on television she wasn't actually watching, I felt, not suspected, but felt, that something had happened. I didn't say anything. Not then. A week later, I was looking for a hardware store receipt I thought I'd left in the kitchen junk drawer. Instead, I found a folded restaurant receipt. Austin, Texas, December 7th, for dinner for two, at a place called Emmer and Rye. The total was $240. Claire had mentioned no dinner out. She'd mentioned eating at the hotel with her colleague. I stood in the kitchen, holding that receipt for a long time. Fletcher came and sat on my foot. I didn't confront her. Not yet. That probably surprises people. The instinct is to storm in, to demand, to make it immediate and loud. But something in me went very still. I thought about what I actually knew versus what I feared. I thought about what I would need if I was going to handle this correctly and not just emotionally. And I thought, with a clarity I hadn't expected, that I was not going to be the man who explodes first and thinks second. I put the receipt in my wallet. I closed the drawer. I went back to the living room and sat down next to my wife, and I asked her how her week had been. She said fine. I said that was good. And the next morning before she was awake, I called a private investigator. His name was Ray, and a colleague at work had used him 2 years prior for a business matter. He was straightforward, professional, and exactly as unromantic about the whole thing as I needed him to be. I gave him what I had, dates, names, patterns, and he got to work. What he came back with, 3 weeks later, was not exactly a surprise, but it still felt like a fist to the sternum. The conference in Austin had been real. Claire had attended the first day. On Thursday night, she had met a man named Travis, divorced, 42, lived in Scottsdale, had been at the same conference for unrelated professional reasons. According to Ray's documentation, they had dinner together that first night, and the following 2 days, Claire had not attended the conference at all. Ray had receipts, timestamps, and photographs. Everything documented, everything clean, everything absolutely devastating. There was something else, too. Ray had done some background on how Travis had come into the picture. Not because I asked him to dig that far, but because it emerged naturally from the timeline. Travis and Diane had met at a rooftop bar in Scottsdale in October, 6 weeks before Austin. They had gone on 2 dates that went nowhere. But before those dates ended, Diane had apparently shown him Claire's social media profile, had described her as her beautiful, wasted best friend who married a boring man. Had, according to a text exchange Ray obtained through legal channels, essentially floated the idea that Claire might be open to something new if the right person came along. Diane had not just encouraged my wife to cheat, she had arranged the introduction. I sat with that information alone in my car in the parking lot of a Home Depot for 45 minutes, not crying, not angry, exactly, or not just angry. More like watching a building I'd lived in for 11 years suddenly reveal that someone had been quietly removing the foundation bolts one by one for years, while I carried furniture up the stairs. I made a decision in that parking lot. I was going to do this correctly. I was going to be precise. I was not going to let either of them see me coming. The first call I made was to my attorney, a woman named Sandra, who I'd used for a contract dispute 2 years prior. I told her I needed to begin divorce proceedings and that I had documentation of infidelity. She told me what I needed to preserve and what I needed to do next. I followed her instructions exactly. The second call I made was to my bank. I had a joint checking and savings account with Claire, but I also had a personal investment account that had always been solely in my name, money I'd put aside before we married, added to steadily over the years. I verified its status, confirmed it was protected, and transferred a portion of our joint liquid funds into a separate account that Sandra had advised me was legally permissible given Arizona's community property laws and the circumstances. I didn't drain the joint account. Sandra had advised against that, and it wasn't what I was after anyway. I took what was demonstrably mine and I documented every dollar. The third thing I did was stop talking, not in a dramatic, cold shoulder way that would tip Claire off. I was present. I was civil. I was unremarkable. I cooked dinners. I watched television. I walked Fletcher. I answered Claire's questions about my day with the same measured, ordinary responses I had been giving for years. I became, essentially, the boring man Diane had described to a stranger in a Scottsdale bar. Except now I was boring with absolute intention, because I knew that the moment I changed the pattern, she would sense it, and I was not ready for that yet. Sandra needed 6 weeks to prepare everything properly. 6 weeks of living inside the same house, sleeping in the same bed, watching my wife look at her phone across the breakfast table the same way she had looked at newspapers back when we were happy. I will not tell you it was easy, but I will tell you that every morning when I got up and felt the weight of what I was carrying, I thought about that parking lot. I thought about Diane sitting at my kitchen table laughing. I thought about a receipt from a restaurant in Austin for 2 people and $240, and I made the same decision I had made the first time. Not loud. Not yet. Sandra filed the divorce petition on a Wednesday morning in late January. The papers were served to Claire at the school where she taught 2nd grade. Not because I wanted to humiliate her publicly, but because Sandra had advised that home service had a higher risk of being contested for procedural reasons, and I was not taking procedural risks. I was told by a mutual acquaintance who had been near the front office that afternoon that Claire had gone pale, asked to be excused from her class, and sat in the parking lot for over an hour. I don't know exactly when she called Diane, but Diane called me at 3 in the afternoon, which I had not expected. Diane had never called me for anything in 11 years of knowing her, and when I didn't answer, she left a voicemail. I still have it. Her voice was a strange mixture of outrage and something that sounded almost like fear. Brian, I don't know what you think is going on, but Claire is completely blindsided. You need to call her. Whatever you think happened, you need to talk to her like an adult. This is not how people handle things. I listened to it twice, saved it, and went back to work. Claire called 6 times that afternoon. I let all 6 go to voicemail. When I got home, she was sitting at the kitchen table, the same spot where Diane had laughed at her phone that October morning. And she looked like someone who had been crying for 4 hours and was now past the crying and into something rawer. She asked me why. I told her I thought she knew why. She started to say something about Austin, about how it hadn't meant anything, about how Diane had told her it was just one night and it would remind her of who she was, about how she had been feeling invisible, and she knew that wasn't an excuse. I stopped her. I told her I wasn't there to litigate it. I told her I had documentation, my attorney had documentation, and that the process was already in motion. I told her she should call her own attorney. She said, "Don't you want to try to fix this?" I said, I wanted to try to fix things for about 2 years before any of this happened. I didn't know what was broken. I picked up Fletcher's leash. I took him for a walk. When I came back, Claire was on the phone with her sister. The next 2 months were managed almost entirely through our attorneys. Claire contested very little, which Sandra told me was both unusual and, given the documentation we had, probably wise on her counsel's part. Arizona is a community property state, which meant we divided what we'd built together, the house, the joint savings, the equity we'd accumulated. It was not a small amount, and splitting it was genuinely painful in the way that financial pain usually is, which is to say it felt less like money and more like proof of what had been real. We sold the house. I took Fletcher. Claire moved into an apartment across town. I gave her that. I'd been advised I didn't have to, but I did it anyway. What I did not give her, what I was not prepared to absorb, was what happened with Diane. Somewhere around week 3 of the divorce proceedings, Diane apparently decided that the best approach to her own culpability was to go on offense. She began telling people in our social circle, couples we'd known for years, neighbors, the people Claire and I had had to dinner more times than I could count, that I had been emotionally cold for years, that I had driven Claire away, that the affair was a symptom of a fundamentally broken marriage that I had refused to acknowledge. She wasn't subtle about it. She was doing what Diane had always done, filling a room with sound until her version of events became the one people remembered. What Diane did not know was that Ray had obtained those text messages. I want to be careful here about how I describe what I did next, because I'm not proud of every instinct I had in those months, and I want to be accurate rather than dramatic. I didn't do anything illegal. I didn't do anything Sandra hadn't reviewed and cleared. But I did share the text exchange, the one where Diane introduced Travis to my wife and explicitly described her intention, with 4 specific people. Not broadly, not loudly, just 4. The principal of Claire's school, who had a right to know that a colleague had conducted a personal affair during a professional conference, the husband of a mutual friend who Diane had been telling her version of events to most aggressively, and Claire's parents. because I had spent 11 years being a son-in-law to them, and they deserved to know the actual facts of what had ended their daughter's marriage. The fourth person was Travis. I sent Travis a copy of the text exchange in which Diane had described my wife as a target and essentially pitched her to him. I said nothing else. No commentary. No threat. Just the messages, his name at the top, mine at the bottom. I don't know exactly what happened after that. I only know what I heard, which was that Travis had not been fully aware of the degree to which Diane had engineered the introduction, and that he was not pleased to learn it. Claire found out I'd sent it, and she called me, not to yell, but in a voice I hadn't heard from her before, quiet and a little broken, and told me that Diane had called her to explain, and that the explanation had not gone well. I told her I was sorry it had happened the way it had. She said she didn't know what to say to me. I said I didn't either, and that was probably the most honest conversation we'd had in 2 years. The divorce was finalized in March. On the day Sandra called to confirm it, I was sitting in my new apartment, a rented 2-bedroom in Tempe, clean and bare, with Fletcher asleep on a second-hand couch and a view of nothing in particular. Sandra said the usual professional things. I thanked her. I sat for a while after I hung up, not celebrating, not grieving exactly, but feeling a specific weight of something ending that had once been worth everything. Then I got up and took Fletcher for a long walk in the cold March air, and I let myself feel whatever it was, without trying to name it. 2 things happened afterward that I think are worth telling honestly. The first was a phone call I received in April, about 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. It was Diane. She didn't yell this time. She was remarkably composed, actually, which told me she'd planned what she wanted to say. She told me that what I had done by sharing those messages had destroyed her friendship with Claire and caused problems in several other relationships. She told me I had been vindictive. She told me that 2 people falling out of love was a normal human thing, and I had turned it into a scorched earth campaign. I let her finish. Then I told her that she'd introduced my wife to a stranger in a bar, described her as available, and coordinated an encounter that she knew would end my marriage. I told her she had done it for her own reasons, which I didn't fully understand, and had decided not to spend more energy trying to. I told her that the consequences she was experiencing were the direct result of her own choices, and that I had not done a single thing that wasn't factually accurate and legally sound. I also told her that the voicemail she had left me in January, the one telling me to handle things like an adult, was, under the circumstances, a genuinely impressive piece of audacity, and that I had found myself almost admiring it before I remembered who it was from. She hung up. The second thing happened in May, and it's the part of this I think about most. Claire texted me on a Saturday morning, not to reopen anything, not to relook at anything, just a short message, plainly written, saying that she was sorry. Not for getting caught, not because things hadn't gone her way, just sorry. She said she had been listening to someone who had her own interests at heart and not Claire's, and that she had been too unhappy and too careless to question it, and that neither of those things were excuses. I sat with that text for a long time. I didn't respond right away, but I did respond the next day, briefly, and I told her I appreciated it. I told her I had loved our marriage even when it was imperfect, and that I was sorry too for the ways I had stopped paying attention when she needed me to. I meant that. I think she knew I meant it. We haven't spoken since, and I don't expect we will. She has her life now, whatever shape it's taking. Fletcher and I have ours. I did not move to another country. I did not vanish dramatically. I took a project management role with a firm I'd been approached by 6 months earlier. Better pay, less brutal hours, more autonomy, and I settled into the quieter life that came after the noise. Some mornings, I make coffee and sit with Fletcher and feel the specific ordinary peace of a house where no one is performing anything for anyone else. It's not the life I had planned. It is, in a lot of ways, more mine than anything I've lived in before. The thing I think about when I think about this whole experience, not the anger, not the paperwork, not even the sadder, tenderer parts, is the parking lot. 45 minutes alone in a car in a Home Depot parking lot, deciding what kind of man I was going to be in the worst moment of my marriage. I didn't get everything right. I didn't handle every moment with grace. There were nights in that apartment in Tempe when I was less okay than I let on, and there were things I did out of hurt that I dressed up as strategy. I'm not telling you I was noble. I'm telling you I was deliberate. And when Diane left that voicemail in January, telling me to behave like an adult, she was, without knowing it, exactly right. Just not in the way she meant. Because handling it like an adult meant not reacting the moment I found that receipt. It meant calling a lawyer before I called anyone else. It meant 6 weeks of silence when I wanted to speak, and one well-placed conversation when everyone expected silence. It meant walking my dog in the cold air on the day my marriage legally ended and simply letting the moment be what it was, without punishing anyone further, including myself. That's what I knew. That's what they didn't see coming. And if you find yourself standing in your own kitchen one morning, holding something you weren't supposed to find, watching a life you built start to crack at the seams, the best thing I can tell you is this: go slow. Document everything. Hire Sandra and change your phone number before you board the plane.